Before this episode begins, I just want to greatly apologize for how bad the audio sounds. I don't know why the software that I used to record just randomly decided to switch the microphone to the webcam microphone that I use, but hopefully you guys are able to get through it because I can't record this again. Like, I already have a bad enough habit as it is, re-recording these episodes over and over and over and over again. If they don't come out the way that I want them to sound, and it's like I already am deep into editing this, so I greatly apologize for the sound quality. Hopefully with what I'm spitting for these next 40 minutes, it's able to keep you guys around. If not, trust me, I totally understand. Nobody wants to listen to a 40-minute long episode full of shit sound quality, but it's like, I really can't re-record this again, man. I was really talking that shit in this episode, and I'm really blowed that they just randomly decided to switch my microphone, but hopefully you guys are able to endure. And I hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and I will definitely make this up to you guys over the next couple of days. We're finna be dropping content nonstop. But without further ado, let's get into the episode. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. We are in a completely different world of college football now. Indiana, for the majority of our lifetime, has been a relevant program in college football. If anything, they've been more so known for being a basketball school. But over these past 2 years, Curt Cignetti has transformed Indiana from being a perennial bottom feeder in the Big Ten to now being not just a contender for the Big Ten championship, but also a national championship contender within the span of only 2 years. So with the success that Curt Cignetti has had, it makes Penn State's firing of James Franklin more justified, in my opinion. And James Franklin, for the past 12 years that he's been the head coach of Penn State, he's been one of the most consistently good coaches in America. It's going to be extremely hard for Penn State to find the upgrade over James Franklin. You're more likely to downgrade from James Franklin than you are to upgrade, because it's very hard to find coaches who can win 9 games or more, especially one that had you 1 game shy of playing for the national championship last year. And we're going to dive into Penn State's decision to fire James Franklin from all angles. Was this the right move? Why was this move made so abruptly? And what's next for Penn State post James Franklin? And James Franklin isn't going to be the only head coach who's going to be out of a job. There's a head coach in Tallahassee that I believe is going to be joining him pretty soon, and Mike Norvell. And I'm going to explain why a season that started with so much promise has now turned into the exact same thing that we saw last year, but with one more win than what you had last year. And with us reaching the midway point of this season, I'm going to be revealing my college football playoff projections. If you live, eat, breathe, and sleep football, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on post notifications so you don't miss when we drop new content. We talk NFL, college football, 24/7, 365 days throughout the year. If you don't want your favorite team to spiral like how Penn State has these past 3 weeks, give JT Sports a 5-star review. Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from, JT Sports is available. The links are down in the description and pinned comment below. And let's dive into it. After 12 seasons as Penn State's head coach, James Franklin has been fired. Penn State is paying $50 million to get rid of a head coach who has one of the highest floors of any head coach that you'll find in college football. James Franklin is college football's equivalent to Mike Tomlin. You know that Mike Tomlin, no matter who you give him at quarterback, he's still going to find a way to win 9 games or more. But the problem with Mike Tomlin, the criticism with Mike Tomlin is that he can get you to the playoffs, but he has a hard time getting you to the Super Bowl, which is the goal for a franchise that has the tradition and the pageantry that the Steelers have. Success for the Steelers isn't defined by what they do in the regular season. It's defined by what happens in the playoffs. And the same thing can be said with James Franklin. Everybody is saying that Penn State has these unrealistic expectations of being able to compete for a national championship like how Ohio State, Georgia, and Texas can do on a consistent basis. But yet, they have a head coach that has one of the worst records all time against the teams that Penn State has to beat in order to win a national championship. And I agree with Penn State's decision to fire James Franklin. You can't be a victim of complacency. James Franklin, yeah, he was able to beat the teams that Penn State was expected to beat, but he couldn't beat the teams that Penn State had to beat in order to reach that next level, in order to win a national championship. And it's the same problem that Mark Richt had at Georgia. James Franklin is Mark Richt 2.0. Mark Richt, the same thing that they said about Georgia firing him. Oh, how can you fire a guy that wins 9-10 games every single year? You're going to have a hard time finding a guy that can give you the consistency that Mark Richt gave you. Absolutely. Things can get a lot worse for Penn State firing James Franklin. For as easy as it is to say that Penn State can do better than James Franklin, they can easily end up in the same situation that Florida is in right now, firing Dan Mullen and replacing him with Billy Napier. Auburn, when they fired Gus Malzahn, replaced him with Brian Harsin, and now find themselves with another head coach that they probably are going to have to replace, and Hugh Freeze. But you see, how do you know if Penn State can't do better than James Franklin if they never take the opportunity to open the door, walk outside, and see what's out there? You don't know if you can do better if you at least don't try to do better. Chances make champions. And there's no guarantee that Penn State is going to be able to find their Kirby Smart. And there's a higher probability that Penn State finds a downgrade from James Franklin than they are to find an upgrade. But at least you're willing to take the risk to do something different. And I find it hard how everybody's saying that Penn State was wrong to fire James Franklin, because it's hard to find a head coach that is as consistent as what he is. Meanwhile, you're saying that James Franklin was good enough that Penn State should have been satisfied with him. You're saying that Penn State should have been okay with what James Franklin was giving them. Meanwhile, Indiana, who has been a bottom dweller in college football for the majority of our lifetimes, in 2 seasons has become a national championship contender with Curt Cignetti, and he has beaten the same team that James Franklin has gone 0-2 against, that being Oregon. And he went on the road to Autzen Stadium and beat Oregon by 10. Actually dominated Oregon. And he did it with less resources, less NIL money, and a less talented coaching staff than what James Franklin had walking into this season at Penn State. You see, Penn State was ready to move on from James Franklin. You just don't pay the second largest buyout in the history of college football if you already weren't having thoughts of moving on from him before the Oregon loss transpired. And remember, for the last couple of years, James Franklin has complained about him not having what was needed to beat teams like Ohio State, Oregon, to win a national championship. First, it was Penn State didn't have the facilities to compete with some of the best teams in college football. So what did Penn State do for James Franklin? They improved the facilities. Then it was, well, we're not able to get the same kind of talent that Ohio State and some of the other elite programs have the ability to get. So you know what Penn State did for James Franklin? We're going to give you more NIL money so you can get guys like Abdul Carter, Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen. You can finally get that quarterback that you've been lacking, and Drew Aller that can finally get you over the hump. So then Penn State gives James Franklin the NIL money needed to compete with the big boys in college football. And he still doesn't have enough. What do you need now, James Franklin? I need one of the best coaching staffs in America. So they give him the money to go get Aiden Okoro-Nicky. And then they give him the money to go steal Jim Knowles, who has been the best defensive coordinator in college football for over the past 3 years. So Penn State held up their end of the bargain for James Franklin. They gave him everything that he needed to compete. They improved the facilities. They give him the NIL money to go get some of the best players that Ohio State and some of the other elite programs have. And he also was given the money to assemble one of the best staffs in America. So when it was time for James Franklin to hold up his end of the deal, what does he do? You lose to Oregon. The same team that Penn State just watched Indiana beat on the road in their house by 10 with a head coach who did it with way less than what James Franklin needed. Then you have two program embarrassing losses back-to-back, losing to UCLA and Northwestern as a 20-point favorite. Expectations are what define us in life. We are, and oftentimes, and production-based businesses. And listen, James Franklin is one of my favorite coaches in college football. And I think all of us love us some James Franklin. We take the head coaching aspect of him aside. If we just were to evaluate James Franklin as a person, how can you not love James Franklin? But it doesn't matter how well you are when it comes to developing young teenagers into young adults. It doesn't matter how well liked you are. What matters are the wins and the losses. And James Franklin had too many losses against teams that Penn State needed to beat in order to win a national championship. Now, although I do agree with Penn State's decision to fire James Franklin, I have a very low level of confidence that Penn State is going to be able to find a good enough upgrade for James Franklin that they're going to be able to reach their goals of winning a national championship, because James Franklin is in the 5% of head coaches. If being mediocre is winning 9 games or more every season, playing in New Year's Six bowl games, being a top 12 team year in and year out is mediocrity, then 95% of programs are more than willing to sign up for that. What Penn State is looking for is a 1%er. They're looking for their Kirby Smart. And unfortunately, Kirby Smarts just don't grow on trees. Curt Cignettis don't grow on trees. And you look at the head coaching candidates that Penn State fan pages are putting together, they are incredibly unrealistic. Penn State is one of the best jobs available. Not denying that. But you're not getting Nick Saban out of retirement. Nick Saban will probably take the Florida job before he takes the Penn State job. Why does Curt Cignetti have to leave Indiana to win a national championship at Penn State when he already can do that at Indiana? Curt Cignetti just beat the same team by 10 that came in and beat Penn State in Happy Valley during the wideout. Why does he need to go to Penn State to beat teams that he already has the ability to beat if he stays at Indiana? He also has Mark Cuban as a donor. I'm pretty sure Mark Cuban is going to have no problem making Curt Cignetti the highest paid coach in college football, willing to pay whatever it takes to match whatever Penn State is willing to offer him. And another thing is with the transfer portal and name, image, and likeness, you no longer have to leave programs that are seen as B tier in order to compete for a national championship. Brett Key, Kenny Dillingham, those guys are alums of their school. They have blood, sweat, and tears built into those programs. They play for them. So there's a different level of admiration that they have for that school. They want to say, I don't want to be the person to use my school that I play for as a stepping stone. No, I want to be able to build my team into a national championship contender. And what Curt Cignetti just showed us is that you don't need to have a $30 million team to compete for a national championship. You have to be able to make the most with what you have. Kalen DeBoer, in 2 seasons at Washington, saved that program from being burnt down to the brink of irrelevancy by Jimmy Lake. He got Washington further in 2 seasons than what Chris Peterson was ever able to get Washington in nearly a decade as the head coach there. Good coaches are able to do more with less. James Franklin needed more and still continued to do less. So, at the end of the day, yes, Penn State is taking a huge risk moving on from James Franklin. And they're more likely to get a worse head coach than James Franklin than they are to find a better one. But at the same time, chances make champions. And you're never going to know if you can do better than James Franklin if you don't at least try. Now, I feel James Franklin is either going to get the FSU job or the Florida job when both of them come available, which it looks like sooner rather than later. Now, will he be able to win at those programs? I believe so. If you can win at Vandy and Penn State, you can win anywhere. If you're a good head coach, even if you don't have the same amount of facilities and resources that you had at Penn State, you're still a good head coach, so those skills translate. But it's a lot harder to find a James Franklin than it is for James Franklin to find a situation that he can win in. He's a program builder. He turned around Penn State. Bill O'Brien stabilized the program. James Franklin added the additional staircases to build Penn State up into a national championship caliber program. Now, who could you hire? Who could possibly be your Kirby Smart? I think you go up the street and hire Frank Brown from Syracuse, even though I feel he may be a little bit more hardcore with the media than what James Franklin was. Red Lashley at SMU, great recruiter, has pipelines in South Florida and in Texas, and he's a really good tactician as well. Has Kevin Jennings playing some really good football. Kevin Jennings was not a 4 or 5-star recruit. So with all of the head coaching candidates that Penn State has at their disposal, yes, there is a lot of right to believe that Penn State can find a better coach than James Franklin. But, Florida said the same thing. Auburn said the same thing. The grass isn't always green on the other side. Seeing is believing. They say on the side of your mirror, objects are closer than what they appear. And Penn State could be a lot worse than what they think they currently are right now after firing James Franklin.
Follow us on all social media platforms. You can find us on Instagram at JT_, on X at JT__. TikTok, you can find us at JT__ as well. So you can stay up to date with everything that's going on with the JT Sports Podcast, along with updates and bonus content as well. Go ahead, follow us on Instagram and X. Links are down in the description and pinned comment section below.
Florida State lost to Pitt last week. They lost to a true freshman quarterback who has now given them 8 consecutive losses in ACC play. And it seems like what looked to be a promising season when Florida State upset Alabama now looks like the same season that we saw from this team last year, but the team is just much more improved. And when you have 8 straight losses in conference play, you got to start talking about coaching changes being made. Now, the coaching changes that Florida State made last year came with the coordinators. Mike Norvell cleaned house with his entire coaching staff as he needed to clean house with. Because when you go 2-10 after winning your conference championship, you have to make that kind of overhaul. So you bring in Gus Malzahn and you bring in Tony White as your defensive coordinator. And I thought that this was a pretty good staff that Mike Norvell had assembled. Now, Gus Malzahn, yeah, his play calling has been a little bit wonky at times, but it's hard to say that a guy whose offense is averaging nearly 30 points per contest is the issue with this team. Where Mike Norvell has gone wrong is with the hiring of Tony White as his defensive coordinator, mainly because Tony White's 3-3-5 defense is not going to cut it in the ACC. And Tony White, prior to taking the Florida State DC job, had a top 25 defense everywhere that he's called plays at. So for him to struggle really shocks me, because it's not as if Florida State's defense is completely devoid of talent. They got a few dogs on that defense. But you see, the issue is that Tony White, the kind of defense that he's trying to run, FSU just doesn't have the players to run it as effectively as what Tony White needs. So Mike Norvell, once again, went in the transfer portal, and although he has come out with a few better players than what he did last year, you still don't have what you need in order for FSU to be an actual contender in the ACC. And I don't even know if Florida State is going to make it to a bowl game. And the same questions that we were asking last year about Florida State when they lost to Georgia Tech, when they lost to Boston College, you were asking yourself, are those teams just that good? Or is Florida State just that bad? Well, ever since Florida State beat Alabama, you lose to Virginia, you're losing to a true freshman backup quarterback despite winning the turnover margin. So you can't beat Virginia, you can't beat Pitt, and you can't beat Miami. So who can Florida State beat? Because right now they're a 17.5 point favorite against Stanford. How can you convince me that Florida State won't lose to Stanford? Because last week, you could have convinced me that there was no chance in hell they were going to lose to Pitt with a true freshman quarterback. You convinced me that there was no chance in hell they were going to lose to Virginia. I understand losing to Miami because they're just a completely better team. But with the losses that Florida State has had, I don't know where to find any other wins. I would not be shocked if Stanford beat Florida State. Although I don't see it happening, at this point, you can't leave anything off the table. And you see, Mike Norvell got fortunate enough that he had the teams that he had in 2022 and 2023. Because you see what Mike Norvell did that has got him in such a deep hole at Florida State that he can't dig himself out of is he went to the corner store and he bought a $1 scratch-off ticket and he hit the jackpot. $250,000. That scratch-off ticket was him getting guys like Jared Verse, Brandon Fisk, Jordan Travis, Keon Coleman out of the transfer portal. Jared Verse is one of the best players in the NFL in only his second season. Brandon Fisk is one of the better defensive linemen in the league. Keon Coleman is a really good number 2. And Jordan Travis is one of the greatest players to ever play for the Florida State Seminoles. So you essentially got a $1 scratch off with the portal additions that you got in 2022 and 2023, and you hit the jackpot with all of them. You got generational kind of players. And with all of those guys being gone, you're trying to buy all the scratch-off tickets that you can get, but you're unable to win them because the way that you won was unsustainable. it's very unlikely that Mike Norvell is going to luck into finding a Jared Verse kind of player in the transfer portal. He's going to find one of the greatest quarterbacks in the history of FSU football in the portal, and he's going to be able to develop them. You have to be able to recruit, and you have to be able to develop. And the reason why FSU lost to Miami wasn't because they were outcoached. It wasn't because they were unprepared. They lost that game because Miami straight up just was the better team. That Miami team that FSU just lost to 2 weeks ago, it took Mario Cristobal 4 years to put together through recruiting and a little bit of the transfer portal. With the season that FSU suffered in 2024, it set this program back 3 years. And this was the best team that Mike Norvell could have put together to turn around this team as fast as what he was able to. And I still believe that Florida State can win 6 games or more, but it doesn't really look like there's too much to be optimistic about with Florida State anymore, because how many wins do you see on Florida State's schedule right now? How many games do you look at and say, right now, I'm willing to bet every single dollar that I have in my savings account, Florida State is going to win? I can't even look at this Stanford game and say that FSU is going to win this. And I'm not hating on Florida State. And despite me being a Miami fan, I was a lot higher on FSU coming into this season than the majority of Florida State fans were, than the majority of the national media were. I felt Florida State could win anywhere between 7 and 9 games. When you're as bad as what you were last year, it's hard to be even worse. And we saw Mike Norvell put together back-to-back double-digit winning seasons. We saw him win the ACC championship. So if you can do it once, you can do it again. But fool me one time, shame on you. Fool me 2 times, shame on me. Fool me 3 times, F the peace signs, load the chopper, let it rain on you. And Florida State looks like they've been fooled a 3rd time by Mike Norvell. And although he does have a buyout that's anywhere between $59 million to $74 million, I don't think that Florida State has any issue buying out Mike Norvell. We just saw Penn State drop $50 million to get rid of a head coach that has been more consistent than Mike Norvell for over 12 years, who had Penn State 1 game shy of making it to the national championship. It would not be unimaginable if Florida State loses to Stanford and they go ahead and they buy out Mike Norvell. Yes, they gave him a fresh new contract extension, but you can't allow Mike Norvell to continue to destroy the reputation of Florida State football. The sole reason why you were suing the ACC was because you feel like your brand has greatly diminished under this conference umbrella. So you want to get out of the ACC because you feel like you're not getting enough respect, but yet you're allowing a head coach to let you lose to a true freshman quarterback despite winning the turnover margin, losing to your rival Miami, getting out-recruited by both Florida and Miami in your same state, in the same backyard that you share. Mike Norvell has to go. And I believe that eventually he will get fired. And I've tried to be optimistic. I've tried to find every small space that you can find to make an excuse for why Mike Norvell is the right guy to be the head coach for the foreseeable future of Florida State. But every week it just keeps getting worse. You're a 17.5 point favorite on the road against Stanford. How can you possibly be confident if you're a Florida State fan that you're going to win that game? I was in the Twitter space with some Noles fans the other night, and although they wouldn't let me come out and talk, they were saying the same thing. It's like, you're kind of lost for words that the team is better than what it was last season, but yet the results are still not all that different. Yeah, you beat Alabama in week 1, but that seems like the only thing that you cared about. I don't think the offense is the problem. Tony White and Mike Norvell are the biggest issues with this team. And eventually you can only point so many fingers with your coaching staff, with the players, until you have to look at yourself in the mirror. If you're Florida State and say, you know what? Mike Norvell just isn't it. And we made an awful decision by extending him when we should have just let Alabama take Mike Norvell from us and let that have been their problem. If you're Florida State, if you fire Mike Norvell right now, you get James Franklin, you can get Rhett Lashley, you get Deion Sanders. And that's a topic for another day, but there's a variety of different ways FSU can go when it comes to replacing Mike Norvell. This isn't James Franklin. He doesn't have the body of work. He doesn't have the level of consistency that James Franklin has. James Franklin will be perfect for Florida State because everything that Mike Norvell lacks in, James Franklin excels at. Recruiting, building up a program the right way, not overly relying on the transfer portal. James Franklin, if Mike Norvell gets fired, needs to be the first phone call that Florida State makes. Because as a Miami fan, I would hate to see James Franklin playing in Dole Campbell. Elite recruiter, good player developer, gets everybody that he recruits into the NFL on most occasions. Always has really good O-line, D-lines. Yeah, like Mike Norvell got lucky that he found that dollar scratch-off ticket that landed him Jared Verse and all those other good players in the portal from 22 to 23. Because now you can't find any more dollar scratch-offs out of the portal. And you can't find any out of high school neither. So I think that the writing's on the wall for Mike Norvell. I've tried to be as optimistic as possible. I've defended Mike Norvell more than anybody has. But I think he's going to end up getting the pink slip. And I don't think it's going to take till the end of this season for it to happen.
If you don't want the starting quarterback for your favorite football team to play like Anthony Richardson, give JT Sports a 5-star review. Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from, JT Sports is available. The links are down in the description and pinned comment below.
In the 2 seasons that Curt Cignetti has been the head coach of Indiana, he has led this program to the best stretches of football that they have ever had in all their years of existence. And with the instant success that Curt Cignetti has had at Indiana, it's about to make life more difficult for the new batch of head coaches that we have coming up in this upcoming coaching carousel, because Curt Cignetti is changing the bar. Curt Cignetti took a consistent bottom dweller in college football and overnight turned it into a Big Ten contender and a national championship caliber team in just 2 seasons. And he didn't need 3 to 4 years in order to do so. So if Curt Cignetti can turn around Indiana overnight, that's going to make other big time programs feel like the head coaches they hire should be able to do the same thing. Everybody is now going to start looking for that instant gratification that Indiana has gotten out of Curt Cignetti. Curt Cignetti, what he is doing is something that only 1% of college football head coaches can do, which is do more with less. You got guys saying that they don't have enough NIL money, they don't have the facilities, and yet Curt Cignetti is going on the road and beating Oregon by 10 in spite of being outmatched from a talent standpoint, not having the same amount of money to put into his team that squads like Oregon, Ohio State, and Texas have the ability to do, but it doesn't matter because Curt Cignetti is able to make the most with what he has. You see, what Curt Cignetti is exposing is that if you're a good coach and you're a good evaluator of talent, then it doesn't matter how much NIL money you have, because with that NIL money, you're able to properly allocate it towards the right positions and getting the right players that are able to come in and produce. Too often times, folks think just because you have all this money instantly guarantees that you're going to have a good team, when we saw Texas A&M flop with Jimbo Fisher because he spent a lot of money on his recruiting classes, and a bunch of the guys that he was investing all this money into, they were unable to play. They were not SEC level players. Curt Cignetti is showing that I don't need to have $28 million to spend on a team. If you give me $15 million, I'm gonna use that $15 million to make sure that I get guys that I know can play. And it's not always about stars. It's not about getting the 4 and 5 star guys. It's about getting guys that want to be part of something great, want to be coached hard, want to be developed, and also have the ability to be good players. So with how elite Curt Cignetti is at his player evaluation and how good of a coach he is, he can do more with less. Same thing with Kalen DeBoer. When he had Washington playing in a national championship and only his second season as a head coach. In the past 4 years, Kalen DeBoer has gone 2-0 against Dan Lanning, Kirby Smart, and Steve Sarkisian. These are 3 of the consensus 5 best coaches in college football, and Kalen DeBoer has beaten all of them. 2 of them he beat at Washington with way less resources. So now, if you're a school like Florida, whoever is your next head coach, if you do fire Billy Napier, you're expecting to win right away. Same thing with Penn State. If Indiana's winning with Curt Cignetti, why do we have to wait 3 to 4 years to win? Curt Cignetti doesn't need a billionaire donor like how Texas Tech has in order to dominate his conference. Like literally Dan Lanning came out in his press conference straight up said, yeah, Indiana outplayed us. They just were the better team. All around, not just on the perimeter, but up front. You know, I'm really shocked at how much college football has changed. And it didn't take me until I watched Curt Cignetti in Indiana go on the road and upset Oregon to realize that college football has never been more wide open. You don't need to have $28-30 million to spend on a team to win. You don't need to have billionaire donors to win championships. All you need is good coaching, decent enough resources, decent enough NIL backing, and as long as you're able to hold up your end of the bargain, being able to make the right evaluations in the portal, because there are like tens and thousands of guys in the transfer portal. You mean to tell me that only a small pool of these guys can play? No, like a lot of these guys can play. It's just that they haven't been put in the right system or receive the right coaching to bring the best out of them. Curt Cignetti is not leaving Indiana. You are insane if you think that Indiana is about to let Curt Cignetti go. This is the best thing that ever happened to this university because forever they were known as a basketball school. And the football team has been better than the basketball team the past 2 years. And they have more than shown that they're committed to basketball. So if you're committed to spending a lot in basketball, why would you not be committed to spending as much or more in the sport that generates more revenue than what college basketball does? And they also have Mark Cuban as a donor. He's not letting Curt Cignetti go anywhere.
If you ever get bored during the middle of the day and you're trying to talk some football, join the JT Sports Discord server, man. Link is down in description and pinned comment below. We're trying to talk some ball with you, man. We want to hear from you. Go ahead and join the JT Sports Discord server. All the links are in the description and pinned comment section below.
We have reached the midway point of this college football season. I figured this is perfect timing for me to reveal my first college football playoff projections of the season. If you disagree, leave yours down in the comment section because I got to see what makes me an idiot and what makes you a genius. And we're going to start off with my top 4 teams. Alabama is at 1 because I believe that Alabama has the best resume in the country. They have 3 ranked wins against quality opponents. Vandy currently is a 2.5-point favorite against LSU this week. Yes, you heard that right. Vandy is a 2.5-point favorite over LSU this week. And Alabama beat them pretty comfortably at home a few weeks ago. They also just beat Missouri, who looks to be a pretty solid team this year. And they also beat Georgia, who more than likely is going to be in the playoffs this year. Now, I know that everybody still can't get over Alabama losing to Florida State in week 1, but bad losses happen here and there, especially week 1. Week 1 is the best opportunity for upsets to occur because when you go 6-7 months going up against nobody but yourself, you're going to be rusty, and especially when you're playing on the road in an environment like Doak Campbell, it's easy to let a game like that slip away from you. But if Alabama was to play Florida State again, I think that we can all agree that Alabama would smash the Seminoles with how they've looked. Miami, if we're not going off resume and we're just going off eye test, Miami, you can make an argument that they deserve to be the number 1 team in the country because they beat what looks to be a pretty solid Notre Dame team. Although I don't know if Notre Dame will be a playoff team this year. They should at least be a top 25 team. USF probably will be the G5 representative. And you also beat the FSU team that at the time we thought was pretty solid. But Miami has a complete team. They got a great offense. You got Carson Beck, who's a Heisman frontrunner, and you also have Ruben Bain, who's a Heisman frontrunner as well with Carson Beck. So you can make the argument that Miami not only is the most complete team in college football, but they currently possess 2 of the best players in America at the moment. Indiana, I have them at 3, along with Ohio State at 4. Ohio State is either number 1 or number 2 on the majority of these projections. I have them at 4 because, yes, they beat Texas, but I'm still not really that impressed with that win because I don't think Texas is that good. But I give them credit for that. And I also give them credit for beating Illinois. Indiana, though, they share a common opponent with Ohio State, which is Illinois. And Indiana put a 60 burger on Illinois. Ohio State beat LE pretty handily, but Indiana completely squashed Illinois like they were ants. And they went on the road and they beat Oregon and Autzen by 10. And I don't think that you can get a better combination of wins than what Indiana has, squashing Illinois and going on the road and taking care of business against the Ducks. So these are my top 4 teams. These are the teams that are going to get the first round byes. Alabama is my pick to win the SEC. They were my preseason pick to win this conference. Miami's my pick to win the ACC. And I got Indiana winning the Big Ten and Ohio State probably losing to Indiana. Remember, they changed the way that the seeding works. So just because you win your conference doesn't guarantee that you're going to get a first round bye. You could lose your conference championship and still get a first round bye. So if Indiana and Ohio State were to play in the Big Ten championship, I still believe the loser of that game still ends up getting one of the 4 high seeds. Now for the second half of this bracket, I have Texas Tech at 8 playing Oregon. So Oregon would travel to Lubbock to play the Red Raiders. Texas Tech, like Miami, they've been miles better than the rest of their conference, as expected, because they spent $28 million on this year's team. This is the second most expensive roster in college football, only behind Texas. I guess that oil money runs deep everywhere in Texas. Everybody has a bunch of it to spend, and they just been absolutely cleaning the clock with everybody that they play. Free money is just taking Texas Tech with whatever the spread is. They're coming off a really dominant win against a pretty solid Kansas team, and I don't see anybody in the Big 12 being able to hang around with Texas Tech, nor even give them a little bit of fear of an upset occurring. And I think that Texas Tech and Miami are probably going to be the only 2 undefeated teams by the time we reach the conclusion of the regular season. Oregon still is a pretty good team despite getting dominated by Indiana. That loss still doesn't really change how I view Oregon. They still are good enough, good as anybody to win a national championship. Ole Miss still has a lot to prove, but they did beat LSU. And LSU looks to be a pretty formidable team this year. They still should get in as a 2-loss team, 3-loss team at worst. But we're going to see how Ole Miss looks on the road against Georgia. If they lose to Georgia this week, I still will have them in the playoffs, but they probably end up going from being a 5 seed hosting a playoff game to probably having to play a playoff game on the road. USF is currently the front runner to represent the G5 because they have the best resume than any of the G5 schools. They beat Florida in the Swamp. You also lost Miami, but Miami's arguably the best team in college football. You beat Boise State. And a week from now, you have the G5 Super Bowl between you and Memphis. Whoever ends up winning the G5 auto bid probably comes out of the American. I just don't think that UNLV's schedule is good enough to trump any team that walks out of this conference. And USF with Brian Brown, he looks like the best quarterback out of the G5. Alex Golesh is probably going to be a hot candidate for any of the major head coaching jobs that come available. So right now, I think that USF probably ends up getting that G5 bid. Now, if they lose to Memphis, then Memphis ends up getting that 12th seed. But whoever ends up coming out of the American is going to be the team that ends up getting that G5 auto bid. Now, for the second half of my CFP projection bracket, I got Georgia hosting a home game at LSU. Now, LSU is a 2.5-point underdog against Vandy. And I'm not really that high on LSU this year, but I still think that Clemson is going to be in the ACC championship. I do believe that Clemson will be ranked some way, somehow at the end of the year. They'll find a way to backdoor their way into the playoffs somehow. So I think that that win over Clemson on the road will look pretty good at the end of this season. But LSU doesn't really have any quality wins. Florida probably is their best win up to this point. Maybe you say beating South Carolina was a quality win, but they've beaten okay teams, but they have yet to really beat a great team yet, which we thought Clemson would have been that great team, but they've been a massive flop up to this point. But I'm not going to punish LSU for scheduling that Clemson game because they didn't know Clemson was going to be the disappointment that they've been so far. Georgia, I think with Georgia beating Tennessee, you got to have them in at 7 right now. Tennessee still is a really good team, and they play Alabama this week. And that's going to be a playoff elimination game for Tennessee. If they lose to Alabama this week, then I don't think we see Tennessee get into the playoffs because with how inflated the SEC is, you could be looking at probably 2, maybe 3 one-loss SEC teams or a bunch of 2-loss SEC teams that have better marquee wins than what Tennessee does. And that's the thing with Tennessee. Tennessee still doesn't have a resume or season-defining win. Last year, their season-defining win was them beating Alabama. This year, they don't really have that. They came up short against Georgia. And if you're unable to beat Alabama, you go 0-2 from that point on. Then that means that you have to beat Vandy. And Vandy probably is going to be the only quality team that you're going to have to use as a resume builder to get into the playoffs. Now, Texas A&M, I'll be hard-pressed right now not to tell you guys that A&M doesn't look like the second best team in the SEC right now. I'm still going to go with Georgia, but A&M has looked really scary. Their defense is playing phenomenal. Marshall Reed looks like a Heisman Trophy contender. His deep ball accuracy has improved dramatically over these last couple of weeks. A&M, they can beat you running the football, and they can beat you throwing the football through the air. There's a bunch of different ways that A&M can beat you. So right now, I have A&M at 6. They will be hosting a home field playoff game against Tennessee. And right now, these are my current playoff teams. If the playoffs were to start right now, these are the squads who I would have in as we enter week 8. I'm eager to know what your CFP projections look like right now. Leave them down in the comment section down below.